The daily news analysis. So today's 6th December. We are going to discuss about the protecting the scheduled tribal groups. So here the Hindu newspaper has reported this may be bringing back the curbs in Andaman. So we know that recently a tourist has been killed in Andaman because of the resident tribal groups called Sentinels. And following this, the central government is thinking to bringing back the curbs or limiting the tourist into the Andaman Nicobar Island region. So let's analyze why it has appeared in the news. It is because the restricted permit regime, which was lifted in the August 29 from this 29 islands, including this North Sentinel, to promote the tourism. So here the issue of the tribal tourism becomes significant. So in order to promote this tourism into the Andaman and Nicobar region, the government has lifted the restriction, that is RAP, which is imposed on this Andaman and Nicobar Island region from the 29 islands in this region, and which included this North Sentinel Island. And meanwhile, an American nationalist has visited this region and was killed allegedly by the Sentinel tribes in the Andaman and Nicobar Island after he illegally entered in this protected zone in the November 16. And following this, the government is planning to bringing back the restrictions in this region. Now, the topic is significant under the GS paper 2, that is welfare scheme for the vulnerable sections of the population by the center and the state, and the performance of those schemes, mechanisms, laws, institutions and bodies constituted for the protection and betterment of these vulnerable sections. So in India, scheduled tribe is one of the vulnerable section. Okay, so let's get into the detailed analysis. So along with this news value, or along with this news, you should also be focusing on the following topics, that is tourism in India and the challenges faced by tourism in India. And this is significant in two respects. Recently, the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, that is the Statue of Unity, is being inaugurated, and following this there has been a controversy over how it could promote the tourism in India. So in that respect, the tourism becomes significant. And more than that, in order to promoting the tourism, the government has launched different roads or belts of tourism, which includes Buddha circuit, tribal circuits, etc., coastal circuits, etc. So because of this also, the tourism becomes a important topic. So you can expect a question on the essay or on general studies paper. So the tourism in India and the challenges faced by the tourism. Occasions and the name becomes significant, then particularly the Sentinel tribal groups, and further the tribal tourism in India. Now let's analyze the Sentinels. So the Sentinels are the Negrito tribes who lives in the North Sentinel Islands of the Andamans, and these inhabitants are concentrated in Jarawa on the basis of the physical as well as linguistic similarities. So they are much similar to this Jarawas. And further, their numbers are believed to be less than 150 and as much low as 40. And based on carbon dating of the kitchen middles, that is the equipments that is being used by the Sentinel, Anthropological Survey of India has found that the Sentinel has presence for the presence Sentinels is being residing in this Iceland. So this has been evident from the carbon dating of the kitchen middens that is being used by the Sentinels. And further, the genome studies which reveals that the Andaman tribes could have been there for 30,000 years. Now let's analyze how they are protected or why they are protected. Then the government of India has issued this Andaman Nicobar Island Protection of Aboriginal Tribal Regulation in 1956, and based on it declared the traditional areas occupied by the tribes as the reserves. Then it prohibited the entry of all persons except those with authorization, and the photographing or filming of the tribal persons is also an offense as per this law. Then the rules were amended later to enhance the penalties. And further, the restricted area permits were relaxed for some islands recently. In a major step earlier this year, the Indian government has excluded approximately 28 other islands, including the Sentinel Islands and the Union Territory, from the Restricted Area Permit or RAAP regime till December 31st, 2022. So why the news has been appeared is that this exemption is valid till 2022, but now the government is planning to bringing it back. The lifting of the RAP means that the foreigners can go into the Iceland without permission from the government. So they cannot go to the Iceland without the permission of the government of India. Now let's analyze why these tribal groups are vulnerable. It is because they said that they have made little or no advancements in over 60,000 years and still live in very primitive life and surviving mainly on the fish and the coconut. So they are having this primitive lifestyle. Then they are very vulnerable to the germs since they have not had contact with outside world. So our immunization has been developed because of our exposure to these germs, but they have never exposed to those germs that is developed or those germs which are present in the outside world. So if the tourist or the foreigners comes to the Iceland, the germs may get infected to the tribal groups there, and this can cause diseases which can kill the whole tribal group in there. And even a common flu virus carried by a visitor could wipe out the entire tribes in there. Since the 1960s, there have been a handful of efforts to reach out to these tribal groups, but they have largely failed because the tribal groups has aggressively made it clear that they want to be isolated. Now let's analyze about this restricted area permit system. So this restricted area permit system or the regime was notified under this Foreigner Restricted Areas Order under 1963 Act. Then under it, the foreign nationals are not formally allowed to visit those protected areas or the restricted areas unless the government is satisfied with that there are extraordinary reasons to justify their visit. And further, every foreigner except citizens of the Bhutan who desires to enter and stay in protected or the restricted area is required to obtain special permit from the competent authority, and those who are having power to issue such permits to foreigners seeking it. Then the citizens of the Afghanistan, China, Pakistan and the foreign nationals of the Pakistani origin are exemption. So these exceptions are not allowed to enter such areas because of this nation. India is having an hostility with these nations. Now let's analyze about this particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So the government of India, it is as per this government of India notification that created with the purpose of enabling and improving the conditions of the certain communities with particularly low development indices. So the Sentinel tribal groups is one of that tribal groups, and the genome studies have shown that over the 30,000 years they are living in this island and they are the primitive society without any development of the modern society. Then this particularly vulnerable tribal group category has been created based on the Debar Commission recommendation. So this Debar Commission has been appointed in 1960-61, and it stated that within the scheduled tribes there existed an inequality in the rate of development. So following this, in the fourth 5-year plan, a subcategory was created within the scheduled tribe, and this is to identify those groups that are categorized being at lower levels of development. So here the 5-year plan which has brought this subcategorization and the committee which has recommended this subcategorization becomes very significant, that is the Debar Commission and the fourth 5-year plan. And further, let's analyze the criteria for declaring a tribal group as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. And a particularly vulnerable tribal group will have the following features. that is a pre-agricultural system of existence, that is practice of the hunting and gathering, then zero or negative population growth, then extremely low level of literacy in comparison with other tribal groups. If a tribal group is having any of this category or the satisfied criterions, then they can be considered as particularly vulnerable tribal group. And with regard to this, the particularly vulnerable tribal from the Simlipal National Park in Orissa. So that also becomes significant. So in this year itself, there has been two significant news that is related to the particularly vulnerable tribal group. So this has become a potential question for the civil services prelims examination. So with this, we are coming to the conclusion on this